All right, everybody. I was trying to text a few people to tell you we were going to be in chapter 2 this week of Judges. So Deb tried to get you to talk a little bit. Maybe we'll try round 2, huh? Anybody want to talk or something? Did anybody, I'm not going to ask the question. I know some of you read Judges 2. So somebody give me an honest adjective or description of what you thought of the book of Judges 2. Go ahead, Don. Exhilarating? Huh? Screw-ups.
More of the same.
Same old thing? I guess for the context of everybody in here, give an example of that. What's a pattern we saw?
It's the same pattern as I keep saying it.
Yeah, desert, Moses, Abraham, then Joshua dies, and why isn't anything changing? Yeah, pattern. Yeah, anything else? Angry. What you mean, Willis? Frustration. Yes, God. It says it more than once. He was frustrated at their behavior, their misbehavior, I guess we could say. Yeah.
Persistent.
What you mean?
God is persistent.
Okay.
Devoted. He did to his plan. His people. They kept sending another one, or they kept sending someone else.
That's an interesting one. I don't know if Mike can see this. He was persistent, yes. He was devoted to his people, of course, we see that. But then what did he do? He has Moses and Abraham, etc., and then he also has kings coming up, right? But this, in my estimation, I see devoted to the plan, but I see as God almost did something different. Like, okay, you're not going to play along. We're going to try to break this pattern. Let's try something new. So I feel like he was almost creative in saying in chapter 2, verse 16, I think it says, okay, so now I'm going to send judges, and we'll see how that goes. And I don't remember if Matt said this last week, but as we get into this book, chapter 1, he was in verse 20 and whatnot, and then I told him, okay, or we talked about me doing this week, and I'm looking ahead at chapter 3, 4, as you get into Deborah the judge, and Samson's the famous one, and before I even get into that, I'm in chapter 2, and I'm reading it, and I'm like, this isn't real exciting, but I feel like this is still part of the story that we need to deal with. We need to look. So I know it wasn't very exhilarating, Don. I know it wasn't that exciting, but there's a couple verses I want to dig into. So if you got a Bible or a phone, look at Judges 2. We're going to glance at about 3 or 4 verses this morning that I thought summarized a lot of what's going on.
One of the things that we're talking about is that in Judges 2, it all starts out with innocent disobedience. Because they told to go in and kill everybody and do everything. And they said, well,
Yes.
these people aren't that bad. I'll just leave them alone. So it's disobedience, but you're not doing what God said, but you think it's okay.
Yeah, good point. I'm glad you brought that up because I think it's the end of chapter 1. There's a whole paragraph, and it says they didn't push them all the way out. They didn't beat them 100%. It was like the worst definition of tolerant you ever heard, because they just didn't go 100%. It was like a lack of commitment.
Did you say it wasn't exhilarating, but
it's everyday life.
Everyday life is not exhilarating, it's a grind.
It's a grind. Good point. All right, I put innocent, although I think I would counter that. I don't know that it was completely innocent because we're going to get into 2 of the verses that show that it was pretty, I don't know if the word's diligent, but it was intentional, I guess. The daily grind. All right, good point. Life's not always exciting, but it's still got the basics to it. So ironic that Walt went to verse 10. That's where I want you to look. That's what we read during Kavanaugh a minute ago. All right, we're going to be in verse 10, but I had that moment. So there was 2 or 3 people that came in and left, different faces I don't recognize. I'm back there. You saw me. I'm back there in a random moment. I grabbed a plate because I was scribbling something down that I didn't want to forget to say. And then Walt uses the verse I already knew. I know other people have other stuff going on today, later today. Like, my mind is all over the place. I don't know where my heart is. So not to kill the momentum, but let's just stop for a second. Father, I know the word Kavanaugh means to get in here and focus. Kind of struggling with that right now. I don't know what this hour is that we come here once a week. I don't know what kind of momentum we have. Lindley used the word daily grind. We do 5 or 6 days, and then we come in here. What is this supposed to be, and how holy is it supposed to be? And we're glancing at your word that is centuries old, but is it realistic to today and this week? Thanks for hearing us. Thanks for allowing us to look at this book, and thanks for allowing us to experience your love and your devotion to us. Amen. Verse 10. That all that generation also were gathered to their fathers. What's another translation say that you have? First part of verse 10, the first phrase. Anybody?
After that whole generation has been gathered to their ancestors.
Gathered to their ancestors, okay? Someone give me the generic Reader's Digest of what this means. They died. Thank you, Nora. They died. The people died, okay? Is that natural? It happens? Yes. Not always comfortable, pretty terrible, and extremely sad in so many ways sometimes. But we'll come back to that word generation in a minute. But they passed on. They were gathered to their fathers, period. And there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel. Who's got a different word for the end of that? Does anybody have remember in their translation? All right. So I want to look at this word to know. Who knows what that is in Hebrew? Who knows what we're looking at? Anybody? We've talked about this. Come on, Matt, give it to us. Huh? Yada. Huh? Back in November, December, we went through this thing of worldview. How do we see the world? And one of the things about the world is, and it's covered in this book, one of the special Hebrew words that a lot of us should know. So I don't want you to forget this, okay? The easiest way to remember Yada, come on now. You know this. You know this. Huh? Seinfeld, the holiest thing there could be to explain the relationship with God. Come on. Okay. Huh? Yada, yada, yada. Okay, so this pretty much, I think it's actually got a thing like that in there. It's something like that. Yada, okay? That might not be correct, but my Hebrew's not perfect. Yada. This, just a commercial, this almost sums up one of the weirdest things about the gathering. Here it is, okay? Probably not the best introduction, but anyway, this is what I mean. This almost sums up the difference between a Hebrew and a Greek mindset, an Eastern and a Western perspective. If you were here a few minutes ago, they were practicing some of these songs, and they were trying to clarify which verse, which phrase went first. And they said, does it say up there, see or feel? You know the line we just sang? I don't see it, you're working. I don't feel it, you're working. This is the difference, okay? Yada. The word is in Scripture over 900 times, okay? That's a lot. 645 of them are the verb to know, okay? But 19 of them are the noun knowledge. And a Western mindset where we live is oftentimes all about knowledge. Study, degree, diploma on the wall. I'm capable of this because I know the information. But so often, Eastern mindset, a Hebrew mindset, is all about what? Knowing, ing, which means what? Feeling, experiencing, action. I've done it, I know it, now I've internalized it. It's not just up here, it's right here, okay? That's the difference, right there. So, seeing something is different than feeling something, is my point in using that song reference. To know 645 times versus knowledge, which again is the noun, information, was 19 times. See the difference? We were talking about that this week because I was talking to one of the guys at work and he was talking about going back to school. Yes?
It's just the way that it's used in the sentence,
Uh-huh.
the difference between those two.
Yeah. Isaiah 40, verse 28. That's one of the things I was Googling back there because it came to my mind when they were talking about the song. The verse in Isaiah, you've probably heard this, says, have you not seen, have you not heard? That's one of the better explanations to say, does it really say see? The question is, have you experienced him or have you heard? And sometimes you got to stop and think about it. So this conversation came up this week. One of my coworkers is going over here to the barracks and he's doing classes. He's trying to finish his associates, his bachelor's, like it's a process, right? And I said, why are you doing this? What's your goal and whatnot? And he's been promoted, so he's in leadership. So he wants to put the degree on the wall, but he's also not totally set on that. And I said, it's interesting because sometimes, like in our job, we have training every year. There's requirements by our department, there's requirements by the state. And you're shaking your head, right? In education, you have certain things you got to jump through. Matt and I have talked about this. He's learning constantly here. He's reading, he's studying, he's trying to teach us, right? There's an ongoing education to all of us. Well, there are some professional fields. You go to school and you get your degree on the wall, and there isn't always necessarily requirements to keep going. You don't have to keep learning. You've reached the threshold, you have, someone signed off on you and said you're whatever level you're at, and you don't have to keep learning, and so you don't have to keep experiencing. That's two different mindsets and desires and outlooks, I guess you could say, in this idea of, am I just seeing something, do I just have the knowledge, or am I over and over going through it and experiencing and internalizing it right here? So that's the difference in verse 10. Verse 10 caught me because of this problem. I don't know if it's a problem. It is to me, or it's ironic to look at this and to read that one generation didn't know what the previous generation had experienced with God. The irony in that is to say, how many decades, centuries later, we're sitting here in this room right now. Somehow it was passed down. Somehow faith was given to the next generation. Somehow it was explained and shared and experienced, and somehow we all heard about it because we're sitting here today. Okay, we'll come back to the word generation, like I said. Look down to verse 16. The Lord raised up judges. Here we go. Someone read verse 17, please, nice and loud. Come on, Brucey. Who just went? Rustin? Go. Like you mean it.
Yet they did not listen to their judges, for they whored after the other gods and bowed down to them. They soon turned aside from the way in which their fathers had walked, who had obeyed the commandments of the Lord, and they did not do so.
All right, Allie, go to the next slide there. Verse 17. Thank you, Rustin. That's my question. They did what? Verse 17, and I thought it was interesting, and I don't know if anybody else noticed this. Walt has us read, the very first thing we come in here, we sing a nice song, it's quiet in here, and we read this verse. This is terrible. Did anybody else catch this? Verse 17. They did not listen to their judges. Well, that's not starting off on the right foot. God gives you a solution and you don't follow it. For they whored after other gods and bowed down to them. That's one of the worst adjectives, whatever I think I've ever read in here. So here we go. If you thought it was boring, here we go. I almost asked, or I was going to ask you guys to describe to me prostitution. Well, instead of doing that, let's just think about this. To say that these guys, because another translation is that's how it reads. They pursued other gods like prostitutes. That's what another version says. And I looked at, I don't know how many this week.
Mine says prostitute themselves.
Oh, put themselves out there a little bit. Okay. So I guess what I thought of was, and I don't know, if you want to share, that seems dangerous. I don't do that. I feel like if you think about that, that word being used, whether it's prostitute or whored after other gods, I thought about the nature of that word, and obviously this is our culture, our context today. But for us today, this doesn't seem like it was for them. Are those fitting today when we think of that idea of a prostitute? It's not usually something proud of your character like that you're advertising, that someone did or whatever. It's usually, I guess, I'm making an assumption here, I should say no commitment. I'm assuming that it's not something that is long-term, right? It's not a committed, monogamous relationship. It's something that usually is shorter-lived and shallower, I guess. That was my next word. So I thought of the shallow part and the emotion part because when you think about the commitment to gods, small g, gods, they pursued other gods. You think of, name some of them, rain god, fertility god, sun god. I don't want to make a god mad. I have to appease them. I'm going to this one for this. I'm going to this one for this. I'm going to this one. There's kind of like scattered attention over this whole idea of I'm pursuing other gods. And some of them are listed in this chapter, right? I'm going to say it wrong, Baals, Baals, the Asherah, those kind of words that we read. And I'm no expert on that thing. I just know that it's plural. It's many. And so your attention is spread out over several. And to have the people described that way when the God that they knew had rescued their ancestors was pursuing them and providing a solution, and they were just all over the place, it says a lot, even though I guess it doesn't necessarily say a ton. It says a lot to me. Let's go on to verse 18. Someone read that one.
Whenever the Lord raised up a judge for them, he was with the judge and saved them out of the hands of their enemies as long as the judge lived. For the Lord relented because of their groaning under those who oppressed and afflicted them.
Okay, my question for this, who did what in this situation? There's several action words in verse 18. What did God do? Look at that verse 18. Name something that God did in that verse.
Raised up a judge.
He raised up a judge. So he said, the kings, the leaders, the Moses, the shepherds, I've got to give them another option. So he provided that, right? Okay, God did that. He was proactive or reactive, but give another one. He was moved to compassion. Good. We're going to come back to that in just a second.
Question.
Yeah.
When you raised up the judge because he had to?
Yes.
Because he wanted to?
I think both. And that's why I said he was proactive, and I realized, no, he did it because he wanted to. He was reacting to the people's...
Kings, he doesn't know king.
Right.
So I wonder if he wanted to judge.
I think he did, and we're going to get into this more. Now that you asked this, here's a can of worms. We're going to get into this more. When you hear the word judge in 2023, you think of a courthouse or you think of a legal decision and whatnot. There's actually one of the things I was reading this week that said don't forget or don't miss the fact that these judges were very involved in military action. I think that phrase is like an ad hoc military. Like it wasn't their full-time job, they weren't a general or whatever, but they became very involved in these, trying to fight and trying to overcome these other people groups in the lands that they were going geographically. So that's going to come up. So I think both out of need or necessity, but also out of desire to try something different. And that's why I said it's both proactive and reactive. So verse 18, you said he provided the judge. Matt said he changed his mind and noticed and was moved to pity. There's two more, I think. Presence, he was with them. Very good. The Lord was with the judge. So he didn't just pick yahoos. He was present with them in order to influence them so that they could influence and lead the people. What's the next one? He saved them. God was involved in the people. He broke into the situation and he made it so that, there's all kinds of people groups mentioned in here. He was involved in that process. For the Lord was moved to pity. This is the second sentence. The Lord was moved to pity by their groaning. So what did the people do? They groaned. If you look up that word, groaning, it means they called out. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but you go to work and someone says, hey, how you doing? And you respond with, I'm good. Well, because if I told you how I really was doing, or if I complained, it really wouldn't do any good anyway, right? Does it ever do good, does it ever profit us to complain? Maybe one time, like say something, raise your hand, but these people called out, groaned, they called out, and yes, God heard them, but really, what did it do, or what does it do for us today? Not a whole lot, in my opinion. I think that's also a reference to what Matt talked about last week, but again, we'll come back to that here in a minute.
Seems very close to the same thing used in Exodus when people were in bondage and cried out. God, it's like he relented, because he those who oppressed him.
Yeah, and I don't mean to pick on them because we know they did stuff. The reality is they called out and asked for help, but what's the whole chapter about? Their actions didn't follow up their words, right? They said something, groaned, hello, God, we need some help here, and he was moved. The Lord was moved to pity. That the words compassion, where did I write this down? He was sorrowful, moved to pity, compassion. He showed the word repent is sometimes used for that word, moved to pity. But this is what I thought was interesting. The Lord was moved to pity by their groaning because of those who afflicted and oppressed them. That's an interesting word. What do you think of when you hear the word oppressed? Slavery, okay. Is slavery ever nice? No. Sometimes it involves what?
Control over another person.
Yeah, what did you say? Was it Tracy? Death. What comes before death sometimes? Beating. It's more than just emotional control. It's physical control sometimes, right? Actual abuse. And when I hear oppressed, I think of people today, and I think sometimes it's rough. Sometimes there's actual abuse involved. It could be, mental, physical, sexual, emotional, all those things. That's what's involved in this. The problem with our understanding when we read that word is that's not what this means. When it says oppressed and afflicted, though I looked that up, those two words up, and they don't paint the picture at all about a physical interaction here. Okay? The words mean to be pushed and squeezed. That's what it means. And so I say that because that doesn't necessarily, I wasn't there. I don't know if it doesn't mean they were actually physically with them, but it's painting the picture that it wasn't as bad as what it sounds like. That they, because of the people who were bothering them, maybe bullying them, pushing them, squeezing them. So you're feeling the pressure, but you're not actually being annihilated. You're not being killed. You're not dying. Okay?
Which two group of people are we talking about?
There's several groups that are mentioned. What?
One to do to the other, right?
Yeah, but
Do you? Because that's something that's been weighing on me. Why can't you be both the oppressed person and the judge? Why can't you have
I don't think.
struggle internally?
I definitely think it could be both in a lot of situations. The end of chapter 1 was a lot about living among the Canaanites, it says, the inhabitants of the land. That's who you're talking about, okay? But it goes on and other people get involved here. So I guess I bring that up because the fact that the Lord was moved to pity tells us something. The fact that we're looking at what their actions was, what's their reaction, their groaning, and what is going on here because they were being pushed and squeezed. And I bring this up because it reminded me of a guy, I don't know, it's probably been 2 years ago. He was going through a divorce, and he put on his Facebook this little post about, I know what I'm going through right now is necessary because it's kind of like wine. And I'm reading this like, where's he going with this? And he said, because what does it take to have good wine? Wino, come on, what's it take? It takes time, number one, right? And time heals all wounds. We hear that. Well, that sucks because when you're going through it, it's miserable. When you're going through an actual, terrible thing in your life. But on the other hand, You don't get good wine unless you go through the press. Exactly. The grapes have to be crushed. And even though that's not nice to think about, it's the reality of a good thing comes out of a bad thing. And that applies, or that question, I think, can rub all of us today. No matter what you go through, sometimes you see on the other side of it, a good thing comes out of it. And it's all about perspective. And obviously, it's sometimes miserable when you're actually in the moment getting squeezed or getting pressed, pushed and pressed.
So in that,
Yeah.
so in verse 18, we're talking about the same people that we talked about in 17, right? People that prostituted themselves. So if they gave themselves over for something in return, they kind of more or less got themselves into the oppression they found, into the return.
Sure, and I think that goes back to what we were reading about how, I mean, I don't know about your Bible, chapter 2 is titled Their Disobedience. They didn't do what he asked them to do, which was 100% push out these people. And there was a lack of follow through, that they did. They got themselves into this pickle.
Isn't it also, the way I relate it here and to us today is that while they didn't push out the Canaanites, they didn't do good. So they lived among them. Is that not go towards, you are who you hang with. If you're gonna work downtown Bourbon Street, you may get a trip that they put probably, you're subject to yourself to the environment around you, and this is, we're going to get a character sitting now, really, not a bad case, just got back up with the wrong, so God had pity on them.
Or you could say, you lay down with the dogs and get up with the fleas.
You get up with the fleas? Yeah, we've all heard that. Yeah, and so there's a lot in that sentence, or there's a lot in this paragraph, there's a lot in this chapter, there's a lot in this book. That's what it shows us. So it's interesting to ask the question, so which side are you on? Like, what are you the being abused? Are you the abuser? Are you being the bully in this situation? I don't know where you find yourself today. We are all kinds of people in different situations all over the place. What?
Right? Hurt people hurt people.
Yeah, I feel like that was said in here a few weeks ago. Last week?
So, a lot of times if you live in an oppressive culture, right, you oppress people.
True, but you could say, what's the word hurt mean? Because if you look in here and say, every single person in here has been hurt, which means that every single person in here has the ability and the capability to hurt others.
That's what we learn from. I mean, I think also you can go back into the short-term commitment, right? Because it's here.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be in the next verse we come to. All right, let's do something really random. How about everybody stand up, please? You might. Well, I've seen a couple people go back for coffee. Sorry, Don. Sorry, Corey. We're out of coffee. The thermos thing's empty. So, all right, we got to wake up. There was no coffee, and I'm sorry. All right. So set your stuff down. Maybe not you, but Emily, you can hold that. But so you might need to help your neighbor here in a second. Reach behind you if you can and grab your hands together. And try to push them up. And hold. 2, 3, 4, 5. And let go. Okay? All right. Reach back, grab your hands. Push up. Do it again. It's too early for this, Heather. I can't do it. And let go. All right, and shake it out. One more, reach back, grab your hands, and push. Push. And let go. All right, thank you, sit down, please. So you're afflicted and oppressed. My question is, did you go any higher on your second or your third than you did the first? Yes, okay, and actually you should have, or your body can allow you to go further once you've been stretched than you did the time before. Get it? A lot of us struggle with that next step or that moving forward. And Matt brought this up a few over the last 2 weeks. Again, we're gonna end with that. Verse 18. Whenever the Lord raised up judges, the Lord was with the judge, and he saved them from the hand of the enemies all the days of the judge. For the Lord was moved to pity. I'm sorry, I meant to read verse 19. Verse 19. But whenever the judge died, the people turned back. They were more corrupt than their fathers, going after other gods, serving them, bowing down to them. They did not drop any of their practices or their stubborn ways. Verse 19 is rough because when you read this chapter, if you say there's nothing exciting about it, it's not good, well, not to be negative, but it's kind of negative. Over and over, it says the people went back or they didn't follow what God said. The Hebrew word shakoth, it means injured, perverted, spoiled, ruined, okay? Corrupt. Not only were they corrupt, but every time they had the chance to start over, they were more corrupt. They defaulted, they went back. I'll never forget, it's a really gross example, but I'm going to say it anyways. When I was a kid, probably 6th grade, my parents got this new Jack Russell Terrier dog, okay? Cute little thing, purebred, yeah, right? Not cute. Dog got sick. Dog would always eat the cherry pits from the cherry tree. Not the dog's fault, whatever, okay? But every time he ate the pit, he got sick to his stomach, and he would vomit. Then he would go back and eat his vomit. If you know something's not working out for you, and it makes you sick, it makes your situation rough, why would you go back to it again and again and again? It says, verse 19, after every judge died, which we're going to get into that in the next few weeks, there were several, they turned back and they were more corrupt than their fathers. That's a pretty rough biography of these people. It doesn't paint a very good picture. It doesn't show them making any kind of progress. It doesn't show them growing. It shows them defaulting and saying, I'm going to regress. I'm going to go backwards and not moving forward. So let's be done with that. Let's go back to verse 10 and wrap this up. Verse 10 said, all that generation were gathered to their fathers. Arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord and what he did. So the word generation, that can mean a direct lineage where your parents, your grandparents before them, now you, now your children, and then your grandchildren. That's how this works, right? A successive process through time. It can also mean a period of time. So you could say one generation was the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s, like time. We study time, we look back over groups of people that have lived. It can also mean, the third definition is the phrase, the quality or condition of men. So you can look at not just a group of people, not just a time period, but the character, the behavior, and the outcome of people, of a society. And that got me thinking. So I thought I was going to bring in a dresser, but I brought a picture instead. You got that? So describe that, please, when you looked at that. Old-fashioned, antique, what'd you say?
Victorian.
Victorian. Bruce knows some time period stuff. It looks French. Oh. It's shiny. It's got a stain finish, right? It's got some hardware, brass stuff to it.
Looks heavy wood.
Heavy, real wood, right? Nice stuff. Yeah. Okay, put the next picture, next slide. Describe that one. IKEA, yeah. IKEA. Modern. Actually, okay, so yeah, modern. What did you guys say?
More difficult to clean.
To clean, probably to put together too. Probably won't last as long, inexpensive. I don't know that I've ever seen or felt or put something together from IKEA that was actually real wood. That just doesn't seem to exist. Pressboard, MDF, right? Modern, yes. 2 colors, 2-tone, whatever. No legs, sits on the floor. I don't know if you guys drive around the parish much or notice these things, but when people put trash out or when they move out, you see a dresser broken down, you see a bookshelf broken down. That's this stuff, pressboard, right? You don't throw away the stuff on the left, you repair it. But the thing on the right gets a drop of water on it and the thing's toast. You know, it swells up, the drawers don't work anymore, and it's disposable. It's easy to go on to the next thing. In your lifetime, because I know it's happened in my lifetime, I remember my dad getting so mad. They got rid of the house phone on the wall with the big cord, you know, the 20-foot cord, spiral cord, and he got a cordless phone. I remember this is a big deal. The phone broke, and he had to go buy another one. He was like, man, I hate this junk. Stuff's just throw away these days. You know what I mean? Because stuff has gotten cheaper over time. This is a generational thing. Well, I remember the book, didn't read it. I guess that's what I usually say when I come up here. Tom Brokaw, you know his book? The Greatest Generation. Anybody read it in here? Okay, it's real thick, huh? It's like 2 inches. I don't know if I'm going to read it, but I know the gist of it. He's describing the people that came out of World War II and came back and recovered in the U.S. and put roots down, and that led into the 50s. That's when a lot of campers were designed and built because people had families, they wanted to do stuff together. Mom stayed home in the 50s, you know, nuclear family was put back together, and he describes the people of the Greatest Generation and how they saved stuff. Their behavior from the war was they knew how to save, they didn't waste. I remember going to my grandparents' house, who kept a meticulous house, and I didn't know in their basement they had put up some little walls, and they had all kinds of stuff saved behind those walls. And when we cleaned out the house, after they passed away, for them having such a clean house, the basement was unbelievable, the stuff that they had stored and kept, because they believed in you don't throw anything away, you keep, and you ration and whatnot. So generations change. I know they're different. What? Come on, share the joke with the rest of us.
It's because that's Tracy's garage, and we just like blew away the garage at the same exact time. Tracy's everything, she was not
I don't know who raised it.
But other people,
pick up all the furniture.
I would totally pick up his bird
All the time.
I've picked up furniture.
She's getting it up.
Where's what I can pick the friends from?
Yeah.
Stuff they should.
But some of it's good,
She has.
and some of it's good that you pick up, and you could probably say some of it has not been good. Is that all right?
We have a garage sale at the Kiwanis every year.
Yeah.
So that we offer to.
And it helps.
Give it away to someone.
But it's that tradition of things don't get wasted.
Mhm.
You don't just throw it away and figure out who else could use it.
Mm-hmm. But a different mindset, a different attitude, a different personality would say, don't keep anything around, right? The closet should be emptied and clean. We're not going to have a broken chair sitting around that needs to be fixed. We're not going to have extra because we don't need extra. We need to have clean, simple lives. We need to have less clutter. I mean, it's just different mentalities of people.
And I think people went back and forth like after Katrina. Like, it was a different conversation, but I was like this before Katrina, and then when I had to gut out all these things that I'd saved, it was very frustrating. For a long time, I didn't save anything because of that. It was like a drama.
It is trauma, and that's an example of how this generation in New Orleans and the Gulf South experienced something that disrupted their generation, because the item on the left, it's very hard to find those these days. We went for a long time when you did not see antique furniture in the parish, right? Everybody had matching fixtures because they bought them all from the same store, but they didn't have the old, unique, and personalized things from generations back. Okay, well, where's this going? So the last slide here, I wanted to ask you the question: do we remember? Because verse 10 says they failed to remember what the previous generation had experienced, and the word "remember" in there is what you take away, obviously, and what you pass on. And so the last 2 weeks, Hanukkah, Matt talked on December 31st was the last service of the last year, and he brought up this question as he was wrapping up. He said, and I've probably watched that sermon 3 or 4 times on the YouTube thing. He asked us in here, if this is a big deal to you, New Year's, Gregorian calendar, New Year's, there's a lot of pressure around Christmas and New Year's, resolutions, gym memberships go up. Diets, someone asked me yesterday if our church is doing the Daniel fast. And I looked at him and I said, do what? I said, are you? Yeah, Daniel fast. Yeah, I knew you'd like that. The Daniel fast comes out of Scripture when Daniel, the guy, ate fruits and veggies, so plant-based. So anyway, this guy's at work. He's telling me this. He said, is your church doing this? And I was like, come again? Is your church? And he said, yeah. I said, like everybody? He goes, well, not everybody, but a lot of people. I said, why do you do that? And I'm thinking, okay, I get it. January 1st, New Year's resolution. He said, I don't know, we've always done it. I'm thinking, as he hands me a bag of chips that are plant-based, veggie straws. And I'm thinking, okay, people's actions, that's what they do, And so I thought, well, I don't know. Groups have tried to do healthy stuff here before, but that's not the point. January 1st, he says, if this is a big deal to you and this is a big day on the calendar and you need to start something new, then so be it. That's the calendar we do live by. But he also made the point, if you know that the Jewish calendar says New Year's was back in the fall, September, then January 1st is just another day on the calendar. But either way you look at going to bed that night and waking up the next morning, the reality is the next day, you have to still take another step and you have to keep on living. And the question is, what are you doing to push through whatever is holding you back in order to make progress, in order to move ahead? It doesn't matter if it's September or if it's January 1st. The reality is, take all the emotions and pressure out of it. You still got to move forward. Might not have the word resolution on it or not, but you've got to make progress and you've got to keep going. Well, last week, Judges 1, the introduction. Do you remember what his challenge was last week? We fail to remember what happened last week. Why are we blaming people for not remembering a whole generation before them? Okay, I know you've slept since then. Chapter 1 had Caleb he challenged, he proposed, whoever will go defeat the people can what? Marry his daughter. Right, that was the reward. That was like an interesting bride price. This is the challenge he gave. And so I picked a picture of a mountain because it was the phrase, take the mountain. Caleb puts this challenge out there and he says, if you can accomplish this, if you can defeat the enemy, if you can take the mountain, I'm going to give you the girl. You're going to win the princess, the bride. Well, he was suggesting and encouraging us today, and I got up there for Kavanaugh last week and I said the word after. Like whatever is behind you, acknowledge it and move forward. We all as people, we got to keep moving forward, because if we don't, we sit still, sit on the couch, we don't move, and we atrophy. That's the problem. I was reading this book, which I brought up a few weeks ago and borrowed from Deb, Get Out of the Boat. Chapter 1, funny, he makes the point, we all look at Peter and all the focus is on Peter. So you have one guy out of 12 in the boat that actually got out and did something. The other 11 of them, he said, they're boat potatoes. And chapter 2 is called Boat Potatoes, and I didn't start it yet, but I'm fascinated to think, well, you can't just criticize everybody for watching, because Peter was an idiot. He was crazy. But he was willing to take the risk and go walk and see his Savior, see what Jesus invited him to and what that walk looked like. Well, I put this picture up there to say, to encourage, to ask, to challenge, are you today, what is it that you need to take the mountain? And if you hate hiking, then sail across the water, or go take your cruise that you've been putting off, or go cut a tree down and make something out of wood, or go paint the picture, Bob Ross. Whatever you got to do looking at this, whatever your challenge is, it's interesting, and I think it's a failure if we get up here week after week and we say, hey, here's some encouragement, and then you flush it and you don't do anything with it. I was wasting my time studying this week and last week saying, what am I going to say? Because over the last 2 weeks, December 31st and January 7th, whatever the date was, his encouragement was, please take the next step. This biography of these people, and they did have some successes, but they also had some failures, is the same daily grind as we face today of us. Everybody in here has had some good this week. Everybody in here has probably not been perfect this week. And we've all, regardless of that, have to keep moving forward. And I cringe at the thought, and you guys have heard this study, and you've probably heard me say this before, that, how's it go? The church is one generation away from being extinct. And look, churches change. Every church in here doesn't look the same as it did in the previous generation. We all know that. You're sitting here on Saturday morning, by the way, just to remind you. But the reality is, the faith that we pass down to the next generation, and not just in our children, but also in the next people group, in the next chapter of society, in the next legacy that you're leaving behind, what is it going to look like? And what's the biography statement of you going to be of what someone's going to write about us and how we pass this on, or how we didn't pass it on to others? it's real easy to sit and fuss about people today and young people today. Walt, no offense, but we're good at it, right? We fuss about younger people and whatnot, and so the obvious question would be, well, what are you doing about it? What are we doing about it?
In respect to the original problem.
Which one?
What is the ultimate disobedience in the age of understanding what I do and everybody else? Is that they didn't teach their children, they didn't remember, they didn't do what they were taught to do, they were told to teach before when you wake up and you walk and you do everything.
Right.
And how you didn't do that to the children, because the next generation didn't remember.
Yeah.
And so how much of the responsibility of today's youth is mine? And what's my role in this?
And I guess the ending answer is, because he's said this before, you cannot change other people, and you can't change a whole country, and you can't change a whole society, and you can't change a whole political party, all these things. You can't change any of that until what? Until you change yourself. And sometimes that means getting off the couch, climbing the mountain, painting the picture, whatever you need to do. So I want to encourage you, you've heard the same thing 2 weeks in a row. If you just need to slow down a little bit and read a chapter that says, man, I just need to glean something from this. It looks like boring verbatim over and over and over. Well, there's something in there. So slow down a second, shut off all the noise, just say, God, how are you moving me in 2023? How are you moving me one step forward? And what does that look like? There's a lot in my past, there's a lot of after. What the heck is next? What?
God's telling me to tell you that.
Are you sure it was him?
The younger generation is not as bad as you think.
Right.
Social justice. When did you ever see it as the primary thing that you saw every night on TV? Social justice. When I was growing up, we watched Andy Griffith. And the greatest generation used this to do well, turn this into who we are today. So, I'm just saying, think positive about it.
Absolutely.
I really do.
Yeah. And that's why it was eye-opening for me to read that the word generation is not just a time frame. That's powerful. It's a condition of man. That is convicting because it doesn't matter your age. It doesn't matter if you got white hair or no hair or whatever, right? Or baby hair. It doesn't matter your age. The condition of man. We're moving forward. You're taking a step, pulling the trigger on something. The question is, what is it going to look like?
If they keep defaulting, what turns them around?
If they keep what?
Defaulting, what ultimately happens? Do they ever turn around?
They do a few times. We're gonna read some positive in here about some of the judges.
I don't want to say that.
Well, that means you gotta come back next week and read chapter 3 and 4. And 5. 3, 4, and 5? Chapter 3, 4, and 5.
So this chapter also means, whatever you're talking about, right?
What?
When the judge was there, he said, right, he was successful because of God. And people knew that. Those judges come from the Israelites, one of those families, right? Came out of it. So now you have where the judge was alive, right? That everybody knew that God was with them. But when that judge died, then the presence of God wasn't there. And it wasn't nobody, and it's just like today, that people go and they depend on the man sitting up at front to pray for them, to study for them, right, and carry the presence of God, and then they just go back to that everyday life. And then when, there's some type of separation between you and that man of God there, right, you just go back and go back with him.
Yeah.
And it's a lot worse. And I think today in our time, it's one of the lessons I think that we can get from this is the fact that, we need to know God for ourselves. We need to spend that time talking with Him. We need to spend that time, reading our Word and what does He have to say about it.
100%.
I don't think I had bad teaching. I don't think people were trying to close me out there. But I know
Agreed.
I came to the gathering, right? And Matt would show us some scriptures and everything, and we went and looked at the context of the messages, right, was a little different. So, therefore, you look into it more. And I would just say, that if those kind of things didn't happen, they might be just sitting there doing the same thing, letting the man of God be everything.
You can't be. You had your hand up, Lindley, just like.
Verse 18, and then there's lots of different translations of that, but it says something like, if he raised them up and then judges, he raised them up judges, instead of a lot of translations. Does that mean he brought them back to life, or did he just, like, what does that
He
mean?
hired them. We're gonna go to the next one.
For Moses?
It's coming up next week.
I'm ready. That's it. Moses said that, he said that, raise them up, judges.
Where you put the time?
That's right. So who are these, like, chosen? That's, because that's what got me to, well, why can't I be? Why do I have to be in another group?
Great question.
But maybe I'm in this group.
Somebody can look that for next week, because that's exactly what it's So we're down the dock. You're on. You're right on.
That's the cliffhanger for me in this whole story.
What were you gonna say, Lindley?
Daily grounding as a negative thing, and I
Uh-huh.
don't think we should do that.
Agreed.
Because you don't have to be a hero every day. We talked about the next generation and stuff. It doesn't, but you don't have to be a hero today.
Right.
You just need to give yourself and them a chance,
A change, right.
you know?
Yeah.
Nobody's got to be a hero.
I think they learn how to get us. When we follow that around, they learn. We influence them on how good it is they see.
But then oftentimes, sure, but don't dictate what the outcome is, right? Because oftentimes you're surprised by the creativity, the genius, the differences, etc. Yeah. So I was reading this first chapter, and I just want to tell you this because this kind of proves what Rustin was saying. The first chapter is the author of this, him and his wife decide to go on a hot air balloon tour, okay? And they get going, and the young operator, it's like them as a couple, another couple, and the operator. So 5 total people in this little rig, right? And they figure out that the guy operating it, this is his first time in this particular balloon. He had done other balloons, but it was the first time in this one, right? Yeah, and the wife's like, are you kidding me? So then there's some wind coming, and so the guy says, hey, this might be a rough landing. So she's like, great. Number 1, it's a rough weather. Number 2, you've never been in this one before. And they're like, well, you do this full time, right? And the guy's like, no, dude, it's like this. And he quotes that in here, and he's like, anytime someone starts their response with, dude, it's like this, you got to be concerned. He said, actually, most of the time I just surf. I just do this on the side. And they're like, we have a full-time non-professional surfer with bad weather coming, and you don't know how to fly this thing. And he says, the wife of the other couple looked at me and spoke up. The only words either of them said the whole entire flight, she says, you're a pastor, do something religious. And I thought, what?
It's because we were on a balloon ride, and that is exactly what the driver said. Well, it might be a little rough.
Look, the stupidity of that story reminds us what Rustin just said. It is not like the full-time pastor's job to dictate what you do this afternoon or in 5 minutes or all 6 days of this week. Pastor, priest can't follow you around to make your decisions for you and lead you. You have to pull the trigger. You have to follow God. You have to take what he says or I just said and say, hold on, what does it say here? Other sources, check that. And let me check my background of what my grandparents taught me and raised me and what I'm doing with my next kid. All right? Judges 3, 4, and 5 next week.